I never thought much about flying. It was just a means to an end, a necessary evil to get from one place to another. But that changed on a flight from Tucson to Los Angeles. After what happened on that flight, the mere thought of stepping onto a plane makes my skin crawl. I still have nightmares about that day, about him. I sat down in my seat expecting to spend the flight taking a nap and maybe looking out the window occasionally to enjoy the view. Just another ordinary flight and just another ordinary day. I never imagined I'd be seated next to someone with dark intentions, a man with death on the mind, and that terrifying man haunts my dreams to this day. It began innocently enough. I was at the airport, trying to pass the time until my flight was ready for boarding. Then I noticed him. He was sitting near me. There was something off about him, something that made my heart race. Once we boarded the plane, things went from bad to worse. The man, that sinister stranger, was right next to me, a constant threat, like something from a nightmare. And as the flight progressed, my unease only grew. Little did I know my worst fears were about to come true. It started in the airport. I was sitting at the gate, scrolling through my phone, trying to ignore the dull hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional crackle of the intercom. That's when I noticed him, a man, maybe in his late 30s, with unkempt hair and a rumpled suit, standing a few feet away. He wasn't looking at his phone or reading a book, he was staring at me. Not just a casual glance, but an intense, unblinking stare that made my stomach twist. His eyes were cold and dark, windows into a mind with sinister intentions. I could feel the hair stand up on the back of my neck as his eyes bored into me. I looked away, pretending not to notice, but every time I glanced up, his eyes were still fixed on me. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just lost in thought, staring in my direction without really seeing me. But then he started muttering to himself, his lips moving rapidly, his hands twitching at his sides. I shifted in my seat, suddenly eager to board the plane and put some distance between us. I checked the time, hoping the boarding call would come soon. My fingers fidgeted with my boarding pass, the paper crinkling under my touch. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. When I glanced up one last time, he was gone. The boarding call finally came, and I hurried to the gate, my heart still racing. As I walked towards the gate, I couldn't help but glance back, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. When they called our boarding group, I hurried to the gate, handing over my ticket with a forced smile. The airport was bustling, but I felt a chill run down my spine. The anticipation was almost unbearable. As I walked down the jet bridge, I could feel his presence behind me, his footsteps too close, too deliberate. The narrow passage amplified my anxiety. Each step echoed my growing dread. The plane's interior was a mix of bustling activity and quiet anticipation. I found my seat, a window seat, thank God, and slid in, hoping he wouldn't sit nearby. I fastened my seatbelt and looked out the window, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Taking a deep breath, I closed my eyes, gripping the armrest tightly. The view outside was a small comfort, a brief respite from the tension, but fate, or whatever cruel force was at work that day, had other plans. The cabin felt like a trap, the walls closing in. He took the seat right next to me. My heart sank as I realized there was no escape. The tension was palpable, and I could feel his eyes on me. The flight attendant's safety demonstration was a blur. My mind raced, trying to think of ways to stay calm. The hum of the engines was the only thing that kept me grounded. I tried to ignore him, focusing on the safety instructions and the hum of the engines as the plane taxied down the runway. The vibrations of the plane reverberated through my seat, a constant reminder of the journey ahead. But he was restless, fidgeting in his seat, his eyes darting around the cabin as if searching for an escape. The plane ascended smoothly, and I felt a momentary sense of peace as we soared above the clouds. His hands gripped the armrests like he was bracing for impact, knuckles white with tension. I caught a whiff of his sweat, sharp and sour, mingling with the recycled air of the cabin. I turned my face toward the window, the clouds below a serene contrast to the tension inside. Praying for the flight to be over quickly, I closed my eyes, hoping for a moment of peace. The cabin was filled with a mix of anxious and calm faces, each person dealing with the flight in their own way. A flight attendant walked by, her reassuring smile offering a brief moment of comfort. I adjusted my seatbelt, tightening it as if it could somehow shield me from the unease that filled the cabin. The view outside remained unchanged, a sea of clouds that seemed to stretch on forever, indifferent to the turmoil inside. About halfway through the flight, he stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over the drink cart as it passed. Passengers around him looked startled, their eyes wide with concern. The airplane was flying through turbulent clouds, adding to the tension. A storm had started outside, with thunder rumbling ominously through the cabin. The flight attendant gave him a polite smile and asked him to return to his seat, but he ignored her, pacing up and down the aisle, muttering under his breath. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Passengers whispered to each other, their eyes following his every move. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but his voice was low and urgent, like he was arguing with someone only he could see. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as everyone watched, unsure of what would happen next. "We're all going to die, don't you see? We're all going to die." The man's voice echoed through the cabin, sending chills down everyone's spine. His eyes were wide with terror, and his lips trembled as he spoke. The storm outside raged on, lightning illuminating the fear on the passengers' faces. Flight attendants moved quickly, trying to maintain order, but the sense of impending doom was palpable. The flight attendants tried to talk him down, but the man just grew more irrational and erratic. Clearly, desperate measures were called for. The flight attendants brought out a roll of duct tape, and they bound his hands and feet, securing him to his seat. He kept screaming, his voice hoarse and desperate, until someone stuffed a cloth in his mouth. The cabin was eerily quiet after that, the only sound the hum of the engines and his muffled cries. The tension was palpable, everyone on edge, waiting for the next move. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, assuring us that everything was under control. Slowly, a sense of calm began to return, but the memory of those moments lingered. As the plane finally touched down, a collective sigh of relief swept through the cabin. Passengers clapped, grateful to be back on solid ground. The man was escorted off the plane by security, leaving everyone to wonder what had caused his strange behavior. The flight attendant smiled, trying to reassure the disembarking passengers that everything was now under control. The airplane taxied on the runway and passengers began to disembark, their faces showing relief. I thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't, not for me. I still see his face in my dreams, his wild eyes and trembling lips, his voice echoing in my mind. We're all going to die. I've tried to shake it off, to tell myself it was just a random incident, a man who'd lost his grip on reality. But deep down, I can't shake the feeling that he knew something the rest of us didn't. Something terrible. I haven't flown since that day. I can't. Every time I think about stepping onto a plane, I feel that same twist in my stomach, that same sense of dread. I tell myself it's irrational, that lightning doesn't strike twice. But what if it does? What if the next time there's no one to stop him? What if he was right? I don't know if I'll ever be able to fly again. All I know is that I'll never forget the man on the plane and the chilling certainty in his voice when he said those words, "We're all going to die." Those words haunt me, a constant reminder of that terrifying flight.